Whether you're working 100 miles offshore, in a busy port, or building the vessels that support our way of life, we salute you. John Deere is proud to support you in these challenging times. Thank you for staying on the job, keeping the world supplied with food and goods while inspiring us to help each other however we can. We're in this together, and we're proud to help you keep powering ahead.
Hi everyone, I'm Jessica Hathaway. I'm editor-in-chief of National Fisherman magazine, and today I have with me Jeremy Woodrow, who is the executive director of the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute based in Juneau, Alaska. Thanks for joining me today, Jeremy.
Hi Jess, thanks for having me.
All right, so we're going to jump right into our questions today. So Jeremy, you're in Juneau. And first, I'd like to give you just the opportunity to lay out for people who are watching this who might not know what ASME is and what you do and how you're funded.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so ASME, the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute, we are the public-private partnership with the Alaska seafood industry and the state of Alaska. ASME is actually a government agency. We're a corporate agency under the state of Alaska envelope. And our mission is to increase the value of Alaska's seafood economic resource through marketing activities. We provide technical resources to the seafood industry here in Alaska as well, such as quality handling, best practices for increasing the quality of the seafood and therefore the value through those practices. Then we also do marketing efforts worldwide. We're in countries across the globe. We have 9 different regions where we have global marketing efforts currently happening. And the way we're funded is we're funded through a self-assessment through the seafood industry. They have a voluntary self-assessment that's paid for by the processors. Then we also receive federal funds. In the past, we did receive some state of Alaska general funds, though state of Alaska is going through its own little recession right now due to the drop of price of oil, and therefore we don't receive any general funds from the state of Alaska. So right now we're fully supported by the industry and then the federal funds that we receive.
Right. And so are you looking at budgets next year? You're not really concerned too much about the success of the state outside of the industry. I mean, obviously you're rooting for Alaska to succeed through the pandemic, but you're not under any threat if the state has to make drastic cuts to budgets next year, right?
When it comes to the state general fund, ASME has already taken our lump. We were zeroed out a few years ago when it came to the state general fund. So the state's own financial issues shouldn't affect ASME's financial standing. However, we are in a budget cycle where we are actually drawing down from savings. And so we are systematically reducing our budget year over year to get to a more sustainable budget plan over the course of the next several years.
Right, so that ASME can sustain itself despite being zeroed out of the state budget.
Correct.
Okay, great. So we want to go on the Wayback Machine, not the Wayback, but the little bit back machine here.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to go back to January 1, 2020. What did you expect to be doing this time of the year, and what are you actually doing instead?
Right. So I think, if we go back to the Wayback Machine, everybody's year has been turned upside down, not just ASME's. We had a lot of events that were canceled this spring, from the Boston Seafood Show to Seafood Expo Global that's held in Brussels. Was going to be every year up until this upcoming year, when it's now moving to Barcelona. We had a lot of other smaller events planned. Normally this time of year here in June, we're bringing representatives, chefs, media influencers to Alaska for an annual familiarization trip of the Alaska seafood industry. That obviously has been canceled. We had a lot of other in-state events planned, traveling to fishing grounds or different fisheries events. So basically all of our travel has been canceled like everybody else. We had a large video and photo production project that was in the works for a few different years. That required a lot of travel throughout the state to the fishing grounds. We've had to put that on hold and retool that for what we could do during the current pandemic. So there's a lot of things that have been changed, mostly travel related, but we're doing a lot of pivoting as well and looking forward to, what can we do in the current mindset to still reach consumers through our marketing activities. There you go.
I'm not used to muting myself. So those marketing activities stretch across the globe for ASME. You're known for selling Alaska seafood to American consumers, but also to consumers around the world. And normally that means your team is on the road all the time, not just in Alaska, but like you said, for events everywhere. What are you doing to refocus those efforts from your home offices, or, in some cases, some people are sneaking back into the Juneau office, I guess?
Right. Well, consumers as well as media and marketing professionals, we've all had a pivot, and we've all moved online. We've seen online sales grow across the globe. We've seen consumer shopping habits for those who aren't shopping online when they go into the retail sector. That's changed dramatically as well. Obviously, food service across the globe has taken a gigantic hit. And when we think of the impact to Alaska seafood, just here in the U.S. alone, about 70% of the seafood consumed in the U.S. is consumed at food service. So when you have a huge sector that's just taken out overnight, that impacts everyone. We have seen some bright spots. We're seeing Americans purchase seafood more than they ever have. The assumption is they're also eating that at home more than they ever have. So we're introducing more people to seafood than we ever have before. We hope that continues post-pandemic, and these new habits that are being formed can actually stick with our newfound consumers. And so for ASME, we've had to also look at how can we engage people in this new space. We're looking at partnering. We've seen a lot of chefs, create a new online presence or bolster their online presence. So we're partnering with some of those chefs. One that I think a lot of viewers probably know because he's a champion for seafood. That's Barton Seaver. ASME's partnered with Barton Seaver as part of his ongoing series to help educate, his viewers on the benefits of purchasing, wild Alaska seafood. We're also doing a lot of other partnerships with similar chefs in some of our international sites, making sure that they have the resources they need during this incredibly challenging time for the food service sector.
Yeah, so the food service sector, I know that you guys deal a lot with institutions and not just restaurants. I mean, that's a major driver of Alaska seafood consumption is, colleges and universities. And, there a lot of them are potentially closed for the next school year. So what kind of feedback are you getting on new market drivers from the processing sector when it comes
right.
to
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's definitely a challenge. You want to pivot, but at the same time, those traditional sectors, they're going to come back. And one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing, especially in the retail sector, is the retail, while retail sales are up, we're seeing a lot of frozen sales increase as well, which is really great, especially for Alaska seafood, because a lot of our product is offered in that frozen category. But retailers have been hesitant to bring in new product forms. They don't really necessarily at this point want to dedicate new space to the shelf for product forms that might be temporary. And so they're sticking with the old standards that consumers are familiar with. And that's been a challenge, definitely, to be able to take these existing products and move them. We are seeing that industry members are looking at creating new product forms that meet the retail needs. Another benefit too that we're seeing, and this is a response, especially here in the U.S. from the federal government, is we're seeing increased buys from the USDA Section 32 program. There's been commitment to purchase more American products, and with that American seafood products, which Alaska seafood qualifies, and to feed U.S. people in need that have been affected by this pandemic. And so Alaska seafood's a benefit of that. That's able to clear some inventories, and that's important because that helps keep prices high for fishermen. It also helps keep our industry afloat at a challenging time for everyone.
Yeah, that is great news. And it also provides great nutrition for people in need and who might discover that there are seafood, domestic wild seafood products out there that they can afford after they get back on their feet, which would be great.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting point, though. I hadn't really thought about, you know, the communication between what the retailers are saying that they need and that they want to have on their shelves versus what the processors are providing. I mean, I know people are paying attention to fresh versus frozen sales, and institutional sales, restaurant sales, but are you sort of acting as a go-between for the retailers and the processors in terms of information sharing? Like, how is that information being spread around the industry?
ASME definitely shares the information we learn, but those relationships, as far as what product forms are provided to retailers or food service establishments, those relationships that are built between the seafood companies directly with the businesses that they're working with. So ASME takes a step back from that approach, and our job really is to elevate the Alaska seafood brand and drive consumer demand toward those products. But we are hearing, some challenges from both the Alaska seafood side as well as the retail side and the food service side, and ASME does our best to bridge that gap and try to create some like-minded efforts amongst the industry. A good example of that is obviously takeout amongst food service has grown dramatically, and so ASME is looking at projects where we can create some best practices around seafood and takeout. Takeout and seafood don't always necessarily go well together. That's not something that especially Americans keep in their mind when they think of takeout. And so, how can we educate both food service establishments as well as the seafood suppliers providing the products that consumers want, and also good products? We want good food to be coming out of takeout because we don't want to turn people away by a bad experience.
Right. Yeah, that's great. That's a good point. Although I will say two of my favorite takeout things have been, there's a local restaurant named Becky's that's sort of an institution for the fishing industry, and they make fantastic haddock nuggets. They have a great haddock nugget meal that I love. And sushi. I mean, who doesn't want to eat really good local sushi right now, right? And that's easy. Don't have to cook it. Don't have to keep it warm to bring it home. You just have to eat it right away.
I agree. That's
Yeah.
such a great time to work on takeout sushi right now.
Yeah. So what about meal kits? Can you give us some insight in terms of any uptick in the popularity of meal kits these days, or is that considered a luxury?
No, meal kits are definitely growing. I don't have the stats in front of me. Meal kits are great, especially when it comes to introducing consumers into seafood. The feedback we hear from consumers all the time, especially those hesitant to step fully into the seafood category, is how do I cook fish? We hear that over and over. We've heard it for decades now. And meal kits are a great bridge to, one, deliver food to where people already are and they're at home right now, and also teach them how to cook the seafood that's put before them. They come pre-portioned, they come with the ingredients, everything that you need. And we are seeing people jump more on meal kits. And that's a great strategy for seafood in general, especially Alaska seafood. We do partner with some of the meal kit companies that are out there and making sure that they have the resources they need to educate their consumers on the seafood they're selling.
Yeah, definitely. I've signed up for I've tried out some meal kits, and I always give feedback on what kind of fish that they're offering. Not that they're really interested in hearing what I have to say, but I'm always interested in sharing it.
Well, and you're definitely you're a more knowledgeable consumer in that
Right.
category for sure. So
Yes, I do have
I
that
hopefully they're
advantage.
listening.
I can give very specific feedback.
That's
Yeah.
great.
So at the President's Fisheries Roundtable in Maine on June 5th, the president and an industry outsider actually made repeated references to tariffs that are affecting seafood exports. Can you talk a little bit about what trade policies are most affecting your work and markets for Alaska seafood right now?
Right. Yeah. It's great for you to bring that up because it's kind of fallen to the back burner as this pandemic has taken over everybody's day-to-day lives. But the tariffs still exist. Some of the tariffs that have been a challenge and for the last couple of years have been going into China. There is definitely an imbalance with fair trade between the China and the U.S. that the president has tried to address for the last few years. But those tariffs are incredibly high for Alaska seafood products. We are seeing some positive movement in the Chinese market where there is a process in place for Chinese importers, so there would be Chinese companies importing product into their country to provide for exclusions on those tariffs. However, we've heard that those aren't necessarily a blanket process, and we have heard that there are some of the products being turned away from that exclusion process. So, so it's not perfect, and those were temporary exclusions put in place anyways. And so we definitely need a more permanent solution, both the U.S. and the China side, to be able to have a more balanced trade between that country, because China is a huge market for Alaska seafood. A large portion of our products are sent there, both for domestic consumption by Chinese consumers, but also for reprocessing and then re-exportation to markets across the world. And that's somewhere where the Alaska seafood industry spent over 20 years to build that market up. And we don't want to lose it. We still want to be in the China markets as well for reprocessing. But because of this, we've had to look at other areas. We are looking at other areas such as Southeast Asia or South America for reprocessing, because we can't sit idle, and we have to continue to move forward with what opportunities work best for the seafood industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody's trying to find ways around that. Do you
Yeah.
know when those exclusions expire? What should we be looking for there?
Um, Boy, I didn't have those notes in front of me. I believe that they were announced this spring, and that process was good for a year.
Okay.
Those exclusions, I believe, are temporary exclusions, so they're only good for the products that they put in a request for, just for the time that they're bringing in those products. And then if they were to say go to a different supplier, you'd have to ask for an exclusion for those products all over again. And so, it's every time they want to bring in new products, it's definitely it's an extra hurdle that buyer has to cross. And what we're hearing and seeing is that if they have other options, either coming from another, a similar product coming from another country or another region in the world, they're likely to go with the easier process. It's just human nature, and they're excluding the Alaska products altogether, just because it's too much work and they might get denied.
Sure. Yeah, nobody wants to add paperwork to their list.
Correct. Correct. And it's just one place. We there's a lot of other areas where we have challenges. The European Union has a lot of challenges of importing our products there, and of course Brexit adds a lot of uncertainty to an important market in the United Kingdom. But Brexit also adds opportunity, because the U.S. and the U.K. are in the negotiations right now, and so that adds opportunity to provide a more balanced and a more favorable tariff system going into the UK.
Yeah, well, that's good news. I wasn't really keeping on top of that, but that's good to hear. So what are you watching on the horizon in terms of tariff solutions? Is there anything I mean, I know the president kept bringing up EU tariffs. So like, and I know he's been mentioning this as a talking point since January. So what are you watching for there?
Right. A few weeks ago, the president issued an executive order promoting the U.S. seafood industry, and part of that executive order was creating a task force that would address trade issues and tariff issues that relate to the U.S. seafood industry. And so that trade task force hasn't completely been put together yet, but ASME is working with other Alaska seafood industry groups on putting together a short list of what our priorities are, so that we can provide informative comments to the Alaska delegation as well as to the administration on what our needs are and where we could see improvement made on negotiations with other countries.
All right, great. Well, that's good to hear. Keep us posted on that one.
Right.
So do you want to talk a little bit more about what some of your biggest challenges are right now?
Oh yeah, that sounds like a great topic to cover. So we're in the same boat with everyone right now. That there's a lot of uncertainty where the market's going to go. How long is this pandemic going to last? We're all reading the same news cycle, that we're hopeful that there might be some positive news toward the end of this calendar year and coming into the new calendar year. But if that's not the case, what is the new normal, and how can we continue to engage consumers and elevate the Alaska seafood industry in the current spaces that we have? So those are our challenges for sure, is the uncertainty. We're going to continue to push forward with the marketing plans that we have right now in place, and making sure that we continue to engage people in the spaces that they want to be engaged in. And right now that's at home, that's virtually. We're not trying to bombard them in an area where they don't want to be. And so there's a lot of concerns right now about global food security. And the best part about this is that, Alaska seafood industry, there's a lot of fishermen, a lot of processors are working really hard to make sure that they can provide a healthy, nutritious protein to the global market.
Yeah, so that takes us right to opportunities, because it is a big opportunity when we've got this domestic supply of great healthy protein. So what else are you seeing for opportunities right now?
Right. Well, we talked about this a little bit earlier, that the frozen sales are higher than they ever have been for a lot for seafood, frozen seafood sales. The increase for seafood right now has been just incredibly dramatic in the retail sector, and that an opportunity is, can we stay there? Can we keep it this high and keep people continuing to eat seafood at home, especially here in the U.S. The biggest challenge, and I think anybody who's listening or viewing this right now who works in the U.S. seafood industry, is Americans just frankly don't eat enough seafood. And especially they don't eat enough seafood at home. And if this is the change that to kind of put people over that edge, let's hope we can stay in that space and stay in more homes more often and have people eating seafood more frequently in that space. And so that's an opportunity. That's definitely where ASME wants to be. We were working on retooling our Cook It Frozen campaign prior to the pandemic, and it fits perfectly into this in this new normal of cooking frozen seafood at home. And we hope to continue to push that into the coming year.
Yeah, I saw that you guys were refreshing your Cook It Frozen campaign.
Right.
Nicely done. It's nice to have that stuff sort of on the back burner, just ready to roll out. Oh, you need frozen seafood? Here you go. We can help you
Right.
with that.
Right. We were ahead of the time, and we were ready to pivot when the time needed. So it was. I hate to capitalize on the case that we're in, but it was the right time to roll out with a new campaign.
Yeah, well, it's not just capitalizing when you're supplying a critical resource. So I would
Thank you
say,
for recognizing that.
that. All right. So speaking of putting seafood in people's hands, the Alaska summer season is kicking off. There's been a lot of talk about positive COVID-19 tests in, remote Alaska towns, fishing towns, on fishing vessels in the processing sector. What are you hearing from processors and fishermen about the summer season?
Right. Well, the seafood industry in Alaska just worked tirelessly when the pandemic really took off here in the United States. They've worked closely with government officials here in the state of Alaska to develop plans. And what we hear over and over and over is their first priority is making sure that the interaction between the seafood industry and the workers and the fishermen that are coming to the state of Alaska to fish this summer and in the spring as well and into the fall, that they minimize their interaction with the local communities. These are small communities with limited resources. And if there were to be a major outbreak, the implications could be really challenging for everyone, especially the state of Alaska, to adapt. And so they've put amazing plans in place. The amount of testing they're doing is incredible. They're testing everyone. They're not just testing them once. They're not testing them twice. They're testing them multiple times throughout quarantines, whether they're being quarantined prior to going to the state and then quarantined when they're in the state of Alaska. And with that, what we're seeing is that they're catching people, showing that these plans in place are catching positives. And that while we knew those were going to be found, I think it's easy to read those as negative headlines, but it's showing that the plans in place are catching people before a widespread outbreak does happen, and it does affect our most vulnerable communities in the state of Alaska. And so we hope that the seafood industry continues these efforts as long as this pandemic lasts.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. And I appreciate how open and honest everyone has been so far with releasing their numbers and talking about what's happening. And like you said, the preparedness is allowing for really tight contact tracing, which is a critical element of preventing widespread outbreaks. So that's also good news.
Right.
As scary as it is to get the news, news of positives is not always positive, but I think we can look for best case scenarios here and keep our fingers crossed and keep doing the right things and making the right choices.
Right. I think we would all hate to read the headlines if the amount of measures put in place were not put in place the way they are and implemented the way that they have been. So
Right.
I think the seafood industry has really stepped up. The amount of personal investments as well as corporate investment into this process has just been amazing. And really the entire seafood industry has rallied around this effort to make sure that they can still operate during this pandemic and continue to provide a very valuable resource to Americans and to the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, the testing alone is expensive, not to mention, all the PPE and other, um, safety measures that they're taking with quarantines and keeping, groups of workers sort of potted together. That all takes legwork and tracing and oversight too, which is certainly not cheap or free. So speaking of processors and input from the industry, I see that you've got a board of directors meeting coming up this month. Can you tell us a little bit about what's on the agenda?
Right. Yeah. So the ASME board of directors actually are meeting every other week for the foreseeable future. They made the decision in early May to meet more frequently, really be responsive to the industry's needs. This is an opportunity where these meetings are fairly short. We're trying to keep them to an hour, though we haven't been successful at keeping them to an hour. They've bled into that hour and a half space, but a lot of good discussion. Really, it's an update from the board members of informing staff and informing listeners of what they're seeing happening in the world that they work in the industry. And then also ASME staff providing updates as how we're making changes, how we're pivoting, how we're adjusting our marketing efforts with the new information that we're learning over the course of this process. And so we will continue to hold those every other week throughout the summer and possibly into the fall, or as long as we feel that this is necessary.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for that update.
Mhm.
One of the bright sides, as we mentioned, is that, more people are eating wild seafood and also buying directly from fishermen, which is great. So what can you just tell me in your own words, what would you say is the best sort of pandemic pivot success story in your mind right now?
Boy, there are so many. I think the best success story is, especially what I see here in the U.S., is a lot of Americans are becoming more aware of the supply chain for their food, and they're reaching out and really trying to support, whether it's a local fisherman or just a U.S. fisherman and fisherman groups. And so we're seeing a lot of direct sales increase. We're seeing people rallying around and trying to support those local businesses. Because even if you're in the East Coast and fishermen in Alaska, I guarantee you there is a fisherman somewhere in your region that fishes in Alaska during the summertime or some point during the year. And so really Alaska is part of those local seafood and local food industries, no matter where you are in the U.S. And we're seeing people rallying around that. And that's really a positive outcome of this whole event.
Yeah, definitely. I've seen in a lot of our main, sort of direct sales seafood groups, I've seen several Alaska fishermen who are here most of the year, but, go to Bristol Bay or go to Southeast or even go to Dutch to go fishing and bring some product home. So it's been really exciting to see that. And also to know now what my local sources are, because certainly I buy salmon from Alaska every year and from California. And now I know, who among my neighbors is actually selling it themselves, which is great.
Right. Yeah. And I think what a lot of people don't understand is, for a fisherman to do that, it takes a lot of extra work. It's basically adding a second job and already a full-time career. And it doesn't, what it helps is it helps that bottom line, and it might get them through the winter of paying the bills. And that's a really important thing for helping up that local fisherman.
Yeah, absolutely. It's at least a second full-time job, if not 2 or 3 extra full-time
Right.
jobs. Just the marketing,
No
the
kidding.
packaging, the shipping, that's a lot. It's a lot of
Right.
inventory. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jeremy. Do you want to close out with any other new projects or any other information that you'd like to share?
I would say that ASME is always working on new projects and new ways to elevate the Alaska seafood industry. We post a lot of these items on our website at alaskaseafood.org. Please visit us online, see what's new. We have a COVID-19 information page on there with a lot of good resources of best practices during this widespread pandemic.
Great. That sounds perfect and a great way to end it. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jeremy. We'll be thinking about you guys out in Alaska this summer, and keep us posted on any updates you have, okay?
Thank you, Jess. Stay safe.
Take care. You too.
Bye.